In the early years of the 20th century, Japan stood at a pivotal crossroads. The country was emerging from decades of modernization, following the Meiji Restoration, and had just concluded a significant military conflict, the Russo-Japanese War of Japan's victory signaled its arrival as a formidable power on the world stage. But at home, life was still difficult for many citizens, especially in the industrial and maritime centers like Kobe. It was here, amid the bustling docks and thriving black markets of Kobe, that the foundations of what would become Japan's most powerful Yakuza organization were quietly laid. The soldier who returned home in 1905. As the guns fell silent and the terms of peace were signed in Portsmouth, a 24-year-old Japanese soldier named Harukichi Yamaguchi returned home. Having served in the Imperial Army during the war, Harukichi settled in Kobe, a port city located in the Kansai region of Japan. Initially, he tried his hand at fishing, but he soon abandoned that trade in favor of dock work. It was there, on the bustling Kobe docks, that he discovered both his natural talent for leadership and a burgeoning opportunity. The docks were chaotic and often violent. Labor disputes, smuggling, and underworld dealings were part of daily life. Recognizing the potential to organize and profit, Harukichi joined a local syndicate, the Oshimagumi, one of several Yakuza groups operating in Kobe at the time. The Oshimagumi was involved in managing dock labor, securing contracts, and providing bodyguards for hire. Harukichi's diligence and organizational skill quickly set him apart. The birth of the Yamaguchi-gumi. By 1915, just 3 years after joining the Oshimagumi, Harukichi made a decisive move. He took a group of roughly 50 loyal men and formed his own organization. In doing so, he founded what would come to be known as the Yamaguchi-gumi, named after his own family name. From its inception, the Yamaguchi-gumi followed a model that would become a hallmark of future Yakuza groups. It combined labor management with strict codes of loyalty and hierarchy. The group was both a brotherhood and a business. Harukichi's men continued working in the labor supply business, providing workers for Kobe's expanding shipyards and ports, but they also became known for their cultural contribution. Members of the gang gained a reputation for performing rokyuku, a traditional Japanese narrative singing art in local theaters, perhaps a reflection of the group's early integration into the broader community. Their symbol, the Yamabishi, was a stylized diamond representing a mountain, taken from the kanji character for Yama, mountain, in Harukichi's name. The emblem would later come to symbolize power, legacy, and influence. Succession and early expansion. 10 years after its formation, Harukichi chose to step down from leadership. In 1925, he passed control of the organization to his eldest son Noboru Yamaguchi, who was only 23 years old at the time. Despite his youth, Noboru had already demonstrated promise. He had led his own crew within the organization and was known as a capable operator. Under Noboru's leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi expanded its influence in Kobe, not only in the labor sector but also in entertainment and, to a lesser degree, gambling. Noboru formed connections with prominent figures in the sumo world and helped the Yamaguchi-gumi integrate more deeply into Japanese society. Yet even as he steered the group to a position of greater prominence, the seeds of the organization's future transformation were being planted elsewhere, in the form of an outsider with a difficult past. The arrival of Taoka Kazuo. Taoka Kazuo was not born into influence or power. He came into the world in 1913 in Tokushima Prefecture on the island of Shikoku. His childhood was marked by hardship. His father passed away shortly after his birth, and his mother died of heart failure when he was just 6 years old. Orphaned, Taoka was sent to live with an uncle and aunt in Kobe. His uncle was a heavy drinker and abusive. His aunt, emotionally distant. By the age of 14, Taoka was already working at the Kobe docks while still attending school. There he became friends with Hideo Yamaguchi, the younger brother of Noboru. This connection would prove decisive. Through Hideo, Taoka was introduced to the Yamaguchi-gumi, and began working for the group in minor capacities, running errands, enforcing loyalty, and gradually earning trust. Taoka developed a reputation for physical strength and brutality. He earned the nickname the Bear for his ferocity in combat. particularly his willingness to maim opponents. He reportedly gouged out the eyes of rival gangsters during fights, a grim testament to his ruthlessness. But more importantly, Taoka was patient, observant, and calculating. It would take 9 years before he became a full member of the Yamaguchi-gumi. Prison and wartime collapse. Not long after his formal induction into the Yamaguchi-gumi, Taoka was arrested for a fatal attack on a rival and sentenced to 8 years in prison. He entered prison in 1935 and would remain there until 1943. During his incarceration, the world changed dramatically. Japan entered the Second World War, and by the time Taoka was released, the nation and the Yamaguchi-gumi were both unrecognizable. Harukichi Yamaguchi, the gang's founder, had died. So had his son Noboru. With Japan's wartime economy focused entirely on military efforts, traditional Yakuza businesses like gambling and protection rackets collapsed. The American occupation dismantled the police force and disarmed much of Japan's pre-war establishment. The Yamaguchi-gumi, like many syndicates, found itself nearly extinct. The rebuilding begins. Released into a devastated post-war Japan, Taoka found a nation in turmoil. Kobe, like many Japanese cities, was struggling under American occupation. Food was scarce. Black markets thrived. Public order was nearly non-existent. Amid this chaos, Taoka acted. He formed a group known as the Taoka-gumi, an informal faction aimed at restoring order in Kobe. While appearing to assist with maintaining peace, the Taoka-gumi also reasserted control over the black market. Their efficient organization and the authority they projected soon drew attention from the remaining leadership of the Yamaguchi-gumi. The syndicate, now leaderless and weakened, needed someone to guide its revival. In October 1946, Taoka Kazo was formally appointed Kumicho, or boss, of the Yamaguchi-gumi. A new era dawns. At the time of Taoka's ascension, the Yamaguchi-gumi had just 25 active members. Its former influence was a distant memory. Yet under Taoka's leadership, the syndicate would not only recover, it would surpass all expectations, becoming the largest and most influential organized crime group in Japan's history. In the years to come, Taoka Kazo would modernize the Yamaguchi-gumi, expand its reach, and wield unprecedented political and economic power. But for now, in the twilight of 1946, Japan's most infamous criminal empire was just beginning to rise from the ashes. The rise of Taoka Kazo, 1946-1964. When Taoka Kazo took the reins of the Yamaguchi-gumi in October 1946, the organization was a shadow of its former self. The war had reduced it to near extinction, leaving behind only 25 loyal members. Japan was in ruins. Its major cities had been leveled, its infrastructure devastated, and its economy paralyzed. But from this moment of national crisis emerged an opportunity. In the months following the end of World War II, chaos gripped the country. The Japanese police force had been disbanded by Allied authorities. Law enforcement, once feared, was now virtually absent. In this vacuum, criminal syndicates across Japan moved to restore order on their own terms, none more successfully than the Yamaguchi-gumi, under Taoka's leadership. Order from chaos, building power in Kobe. Taoka Kazo, with his reputation for discipline and strategic thinking, immediately set about stabilizing the organization. Drawing on his own background as a dock worker, he reconnected with labor unions and maritime contractors in Kobe, Japan's key port city. There he founded a construction business that employed Yamaguchi-gumi members. These crews were tasked with rebuilding docks, warehouses, and other essential infrastructure destroyed in the war. It was a practical move but also a calculated one. By embedding the Yamaguchi-gumi in the labor force and public contracts, Taoka ensured the organization had a steady stream of income and legitimate influence. The group's discipline, efficiency, and reputation for handling disputes quickly and without bureaucratic delay earned them respect and fear in equal measure. Control over the port, economic expansion. As Kobe's docks revived, Taoka worked to extend control over maritime logistics. By the mid-1950s, he had successfully inserted the Yamaguchi-gumi into nearly every level of port operations. Stevedores, transporters, warehouse guards and security contractors all reported to men loyal to Taoka. This dominance eventually allowed the syndicate to control approximately 80% of Kobe's cargo operations, an unprecedented grip on one of Japan's busiest ports. It was not just about revenue, it was about legitimacy. Control over the docks gave the Yamaguchi-gumi a seat at the table in city politics and in the business world. Politicians, labor bosses and shipping magnates began to consult with the syndicate, not in the shadows but often in full view. Organized growth, from gang to syndicate. While the organization had previously operated as a loosely affiliated gang, Taoka restructured the Yamaguchi-gumi into a highly organized syndicate. Drawing inspiration from both military hierarchy and traditional Yakuza customs, he formalized the Oyabun-Kobun relationship, a system of senior and junior roles bound by absolute loyalty. Under Taoka's leadership, each regional boss, or kumicho, retained local authority but pledged loyalty to the syndicate as a whole. The expansion was swift. By the early 1960s, over 300 smaller Yakuza families had formally aligned themselves under the Yamaguchi-gumi umbrella. This brought the organization's total membership to over 10,000 men, a number unmatched by any other Yakuza group in the country. Confrontation in Kobe, conflict with the Honda-kai. Such growth, however, did not come without conflict. In post-war Kobe, the Honda-kai, a Bakuto-style gambling gang, had deep roots and dominated illegal betting operations. Taoka understood that to expand further he would need to either eliminate or absorb the Honda-kai. Initially he pursued diplomacy, attempting to form an alliance that would allow both syndicates to operate without interference. But the Honda-kai viewed the Yamaguchi-gumi's rise with suspicion. Talks collapsed, and within weeks, a violent gang war erupted. What followed was a series of coordinated attacks, assassinations and street battles, often carried out with impunity amid the confusion of post-war lawlessness. In the end, Taoka's men prevailed. The Honda-kai was disbanded, and many of its surviving members either left the underworld, or were absorbed into the Yamaguchi-gumi. It was a turning point. For the first time, the Yamaguchi-gumi had demonstrated its capacity to conquer rival syndicates, not just coexist with them. Venturing beyond Kobe, expansion into Osaka. With Kobe firmly under control, Taoka turned his attention to Osaka, Japan's second-largest city. Its entertainment districts and thriving post-war economy made it a critical target. There, the Miyamoto-kai and a Korean gang known as the Mio-kai controlled key parts of the city's gambling and nightlife sectors. Once again, conflict proved inevitable. Through both calculated negotiation and open confrontation, the Yamaguchi-gumi expanded into Osaka. By the end of the 1950s, both the Miyamoto-kai and Mio-kai had been neutralized. The Yamaguchi-gumi now held territory in two of Japan's most economically vital cities. Influence in entertainment and business. But Taoka's ambitions did not stop at the street. He understood that the post-war public craved entertainment, and he sought to capitalize on it. Under his direction, the Yamaguchi-gumi established a talent agency that managed high-profile figures in the emerging Japanese entertainment scene. This agency worked with singers like Misora Hibari, musicians such as Tabata Yoshi, and comedians including Enomoto Kenichi, figures who defined post-war pop culture. These associations gave the Yamaguchi-gumi access to venues, production companies and television stations. Entertainment, Taoka's eyes, was more than a distraction. It was a cultural stronghold and a legitimate way to integrate the syndicate deeper into the daily lives of the Japanese public. A quiet alliance with politics. As the syndicate's influence spread, whispers of connections with political figures began to surface. Taoka had formed a discreet but potent relationship with certain members of the Liberal Democratic Party, particularly in the Ministry of Transport. With construction projects booming across Japan, having access to government contracts became another source of revenue. One such ally was Tanaka Kakoe, the influential politician later known as the Tiger of Tokyo. Their relationship proved instrumental in securing funding, contracts, and immunity from certain investigations. The boundaries between organized crime, business and politics in post-war Japan were never clear, and Taoka Kazo operated with careful awareness of that ambiguity. Internal discipline and philosophy. Taoka's leadership style combined discipline, vision, and ruthlessness. He believed that the Yakuza of the future must be literate in business. Members were encouraged, sometimes required to read financial newspapers, understand economic trends, and dress like professionals rather than street thugs. While he never abandoned the strict codes of Yakuza honor, Taoka saw the value in transformation. His version of the Yamaguchi-gumi was a syndicate that embraced capitalism, without losing its traditional identity. The dawn of a new era. By 1964, the Yamaguchi-gumi had reached a scale previously unthinkable. It had grown from a decimated gang of 25 men to a vast criminal syndicate with 10,000 active members, control over major ports, stakes in entertainment, construction, labor unions and influence that extended into the political and business elite. Taoka Kazo had not just rebuilt the Yamaguchi-gumi, he had redefined what it meant to be a Yakuza in post-war Japan. But his success also drew attention, both from law enforcement and from rival syndicates across the country. As the 1960s drew to a close, tensions between the eastern and western underworlds began to rise. What followed would be one of the most pivotal confrontations in Yakuza history. East versus West, the national expansion and syndicate wars, 1964. 1964, the Yamaguchi-gumi stood at the pinnacle of its power. Under Taoka Kazo, the syndicate had grown from a weakened regional outfit into the largest organized crime group in Japan. With over 10,000 active members and influence reaching from Kobe to Osaka, it had come to dominate the Kansai region's underworld with unrivaled authority. But Taoka's vision was even greater. As Japan's post-war reconstruction accelerated and the Tokyo Olympics placed the country on the global stage, a new era had begun. Infrastructure projects boomed. Wealth flowed into construction, transportation and entertainment, and wherever opportunity emerged, so too did competition. The Yamaguchi-gumi now turned its gaze eastward, shifting borders. Expansion into Tokyo. Tokyo, the heart of Japan's economic and political power, was the next logical frontier. But unlike Kansai, the Kanto region was already teeming with criminal syndicates. These included the Inagawa-kai, the Sumiyoshi-kai, and the Tozai-kai, each entrenched in their own turf, fiercely guarding their territory. Though individually smaller than the Yamaguchi-gumi, these Kanto-based groups understood that any attempt by Taoka to expand into their region could threaten their survival. What followed was a chess game of positioning, alliances and provocation. In 1963, Taoka was approached by Kodama Yoshio, a powerful political fixer and wartime nationalist, who had survived incarceration after World War II and now sought to shape the criminal landscape of Japan. Kodama envisioned an all-Japan syndicate alliance, a union that would consolidate power, avoid unnecessary wars and maintain the balance between rival gangs. Kodama proposed that Taoka and the Yamaguchi-gumi join this grand alliance. Taoka declined. The formation of the Kanto-kai. In response to Taoka's rejection, Kodama organized a strategic coalition of Kanto-based gangs, led by the Inagawa-kai, along with the rising Sumiyoshi-kai, and the Korean-led Tozai. Together their combined forces numbered over 13,000 men, more than enough in theory to push back against Kansai expansion. This set the stage for a covert underworld standoff between East and West. On the surface there were gestures of civility, meetings, photo opportunities, even public declarations of peace. But beneath, both sides prepared for inevitable conflict, silent incursions and the Yokohama test. Despite the tension, Taoka remained undeterred. He continued to send small contingents of Yamaguchi-gumi men into Yokohama, Tokyo's twin port city and a key territory of the Tozai-kai. These incursions were carefully measured, never more than 10 men at a time to avoid open confrontation, but frequent enough to signal intent. Each presence challenged the authority of the Kanto groups and provoked sporadic violence. One such incident, known as the Grand Palace Incident, involved a bloody standoff inside a luxury hotel in Yokohama. Though swiftly resolved, it symbolized a growing instability. Kodama, increasingly alarmed, sought to mediate a truce. He arranged for a direct alliance between the Yamaguchi-gumi and the Tozai. Under the terms of this agreement, Taoka would limit his operations in Yokohama, and in return the Kanto groups would allow limited Yamaguchi-gumi presence in designated business sectors. But Taoka, true to his reputation, had other plans. The League Against Drugs, a public strategy. In a move both unexpected and calculated, Taoka launched the League for the Stomping Out of Drug Trafficking. This seemingly civic-minded campaign was framed as a crackdown on narcotics abuse, especially among younger Yakuza members.
He denounced addiction as a crisis for both the underworld and society, and even mobilized housewives' associations to join in the protest. Beneath this moral veneer, however, the League served another purpose. It was a front for renewed expansion into Tokyo and Yokohama. Under the guise of anti-drug activism, Taoka's men began operating in areas previously off-limits. They organized rallies, ran media interviews and established satellite offices, subtly asserting presence while keeping within the bounds of legality. The media praised the initiative. The police, bound by limited evidence, remained passive, but the Kanto gangs understood exactly what was happening. Retaliation and repercussions. Tensions boiled over in 1972, when a member of the Tozai-kai shot Tanaka Saigen, a key political ally of Taoka and one of the architects behind the anti-drug campaign. Tanaka survived, but the message was clear: the Kanto syndicates would not tolerate further incursions. The assailant later took his own life. In apology, Machi Hisayuki, the Tozai-kai boss, delivered 2 million yen and his severed fingertip, a traditional act of contrition known as yubitsume, to Taoka Kazuo. This incident marked a turning point. Soon after, Taoka approached the Inagawa-kai, the largest and most stable Kanto group. Their leader, having just returned from prison, found his organization weakened by arrests and internal disarray. Recognizing the futility of continued resistance, he accepted a proposal for formal alliance. In 1972, with Kodama as mediator, the Yamaguchi-gumi and Inagawa-kai joined forces. The ceremony was steeped in Yakuza tradition. Ceremonial sake cups were exchanged. Oaths of loyalty were spoken. The two bosses wrapped their cups in silk cloth, symbolizing the merging of two empires. The alliance was complete. For the first time in Japanese history, the Yamaguchi-gumi had influence across both the east and west of the country. The consolidation of power in the years that followed, Taoka continued his expansion carefully, but with unmistakable intent. With Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka and Kobe under varying degrees of control, the Yamaguchi-gumi's presence could be felt across railways, shipping, entertainment and construction. Revenues from construction, gambling, entertainment and port operations soared into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Though criminal in structure, the Yamaguchi-gumi now operated with the discipline and bureaucracy of a corporation. There were departments, hierarchies, protocols and political divisions. It was no longer a gang, it was an institution. The fragile calm before the storm, but power breeds challenge. Rival groups that had been absorbed or displaced began to conspire. Younger members within the Yamaguchi-gumi grew restless, disconnected from the traditional values of the syndicate's elders. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies, alarmed by the syndicate's sheer reach, began to scrutinize the group more intensely. And then came a moment that shook the organization to its core. In 1978, while seated in a Kyoto nightclub, Taoka Kazuo was approached by an assassin from the Matsuda-gumi, a rival Kansai group with long-held grievances. Without warning, a revolver was drawn and fired. Taoka was struck in the neck. Miraculously, he survived the attack, but the incident marked the beginning of the end. His health, already declining, deteriorated further. The power he had built over 3 decades now rested on uncertain foundation. Succession crisis and the Yama-Ichi War 1978-1985. In the late summer of 1978, Japan's underworld stood still. At a nightclub in Kyoto, in the heart of the historic capital, an armed assailant approached a table surrounded by bodyguards. Among those seated was Taoka Kazuo, the supreme boss of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the most powerful Yakuza syndicate Japan had ever known. The gunman raised a .38 caliber revolver and fired. Taoka was struck in the neck. The shooter was Narumi Kiyoshi, a member of the Matsuda-gumi, a rival gang, long overshadowed by the Yamaguchi-gumi's dominance in the Kansai region. His motive was said to be revenge, for a leader lost years earlier in a turf war with Taoka's men. The attack did not succeed in killing the Yamaguchi-gumi leader. Taoka survived, barely, but the wound and what it represented would mark the beginning of a slow, inevitable decline. Taoka Kazuo would never again command with the same clarity or control. A shadow over Kobe, the final years of Taoka Kazuo. Though recovering physically, Taoka withdrew from public view. He avoided high-profile appearances. He delegated more of his duties, and in the shadows a new problem began to grow. Success. Taoka had ruled for more than 3 decades, taking the Yamaguchi-gumi from a dying post-war relic to a national power. But like many powerful men, he had not made firm arrangements for what would come after. His most likely successor, Yamamoto-Keiichi, a seasoned and respected lieutenant, was arrested and imprisoned during the violent crackdowns of the late 1970s. Upon his release, he would die shortly thereafter from liver failure. Taoka's unexpected vulnerability revealed a critical weakness in the Yamaguchi-gumi's internal structure. The organization, once united under his singular authority, now had no clear path forward. This power vacuum would ignite a chain reaction of factionalism, betrayal and bloodshed. The widow interim, a woman at the helm. In the wake of Taoka's fading health, the syndicate found itself leaderless for the first time in decades. In an unprecedented move, Taoka's widow, Fumiko, took temporary control. Though unofficial, her authority was respected by many of the group's senior officers. Fumiko had long been known within the organization for her intelligence and grace, quietly influential during her husband's reign, but she was navigating dangerous water. The Yamaguchi-gumi was a patriarchal institution where hierarchy, age and masculinity were deeply entrenched. Her position, however brief, was met with resistance, particularly from younger or more ambitious members who saw an opportunity to claim power. During this uncertain interregnum, the syndicate's internal problems worsened. Younger Kobun low-ranking members felt unrepresented and disconnected. Traditional values were eroding. Some factions began discussing independence. The most dangerous voice among them belonged to Hiroshi Yamamoto. The leadership election and its fallout. By 1981, with Taoka's health in terminal decline, the Yamaguchi-gumi council, composed of over 100 family bosses, moved to elect a new kumicho, or supreme leader. Two figures emerged as frontrunners: Takanaka Masahisa, a longtime loyalist, respected for his organizational skills and ties to the Taoka family; Hiroshi Yamamoto, a distant relative of Keiichi Yamamoto, charismatic and deeply popular among certain factions. The vote was decisive. Takanaka was elected as the fifth-generation kumicho, but not everyone accepted the result. Yamamoto, outraged by the decision, declared his withdrawal from the Yamaguchi-gumi. He would form his own syndicate, the Yakuza-kai, taking with him an estimated 50 affiliate gangs, and nearly half the manpower of the original organization. The split sent shockwaves through the Japanese underworld. It was the largest defection in Yakuza history. The assassination of Takanaka, on the morning of January 26, 1985, in Suta City, Osaka, 4 black vehicles approached a residential apartment complex. Standing outside the building was Takanaka Masahisa, accompanied by 2 of his senior officers. All 3 men were preparing for a scheduled business meeting. None of them made it inside. Gunmen from the Yakuza-kai emerged from the vehicles and opened fire. 1 man died instantly. Another passed away hours later in hospital. Takanaka, the Yamaguchi-gumi boss, was shot repeatedly and rushed to surgery. Despite desperate efforts, he succumbed to his wounds that same day. The assassination sent the syndicate into full-scale war. The Yama-Ichi War begins. Within days, the Yamaguchi-gumi declared war on the Yakuza-kai. The Yama-Ichi War, as it came to be known, would become the bloodiest gang conflict in modern Japanese history. The violence was swift, targeted and relentless. By the end of 1985, over 200 armed attacks had been reported across cities like Kobe, Osaka and Kyoto. Shootings, arsons, stabbings, ambushes in broad daylight. Though Japanese law enforcement had traditionally tolerated Yakuza activity so long as civilians were unharmed, this conflict broke that unspoken agreement. Collateral damage mounted, civilians were wounded, business districts were disrupted, public safety was threatened. The public outcry forced authorities to act. More than 2,000 arrests were made, with over 500 senior gang members taken into custody, including several from the Yamaguchi-gumi's leadership. International exposure and the Hawaii arms scandal. As the Yama-Ichi War raged, another scandal erupted. This one beyond Japan's borders. Authorities uncovered a plot by Yamaguchi-gumi operatives to purchase a cache of military-grade weapons in Hawaii, including rocket launchers and automatic rifles. Undercover agents posed as arms dealers. The operation was recorded and televised. 2 high-ranking members of the syndicate were arrested in the United States and put on trial. In court, the Yakuza leaders claimed cultural misunderstanding, insisting they were merely seeking to hire Michael Jackson for a performance in Japan. Though the jury acquitted the men citing entrapment, The damage to the Yamaguchi-gumi's international reputation was profound. It revealed just how far-reaching and audacious the syndicate had become. A war's quiet end. Despite their firepower and boldness, the Yakuza-kai steadily lost ground. They were outnumbered, outfinanced, and most critically lacked the long-standing relationships with Japan's political and economic elite that the Yamaguchi-gumi had cultivated. By 1989, the Yakuza-kai was reduced to a minor syndicate, its power broken, its influence scattered. The Yamaguchi-gumi, though deeply wounded, had survived. In that same year, a new leader was chosen, Watanabe Yoshinori. He would become the sixth-generation kumicho, tasked with rebuilding the syndicate after its most harrowing internal conflict.
Reform and Reinvention, 1989-2005. In the wake of the bloodiest gang war in modern Japanese history, the Yamaguchi-gumi stood at a crossroads. The Yama-Ichi War, which claimed the lives of over 38 men, had tested the limits of its power and structure. Internally, it had shaken loyalties. Externally, it had invited the full attention of the Japanese public and law enforcement alike. But by 1989, the dust had settled. The Ichiwakai had retreated into obscurity. The streets of Kobe and Osaka had grown quiet once more. Now the syndicate needed a leader capable of not only rebuilding its fractured hierarchy, but of steering it through the shifting political and legal landscape of modern Japan. That leader would be Watanabe Yoshinori, a new kumicho. Watanabe Yoshinori. Watanabe was elected as the fifth-generation kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi in 1989. In contrast to some of his predecessors, Watanabe was not a man of flamboyant violence or public spectacles. He was strategic, methodical, and above all else, discreet. His priorities were clear. First, he would consolidate control over the now reunified Yamaguchi-gumi network. Then he would stabilize and expand the organization's financial base, steering it deeper into Japan's booming construction, real estate, and corporate fronts. At the time of his rise, the Yamaguchi-gumi boasted an estimated 20,000 members. Over the next 16 years, that number would nearly double. But Watanabe's greatest challenge would not come from rival gangs. It would come from the government itself. The era of Boryokudan. Japan declares war on the Yakuza. By the early 1990s, Japanese society was undergoing profound change. The economic miracle of the post-war decades had slowed. Public tolerance for criminal influence, once quietly accepted in exchange for order, had worn thin. The Yama-Ichi War had brought too much violence into public view. In 1991, the Japanese government passed the Boryokudan Taisaku Ho, the Act on Countermeasures Against Organized Crime. This law was the most significant crackdown on the Yakuza in modern history. For the first time, Yakuza syndicates like the Yamaguchi-gumi were officially classified as Boryokudan, violent groups, subject to special legal restrictions. The new framework empowered police to monitor, restrict and prosecute Yakuza activity far more aggressively. Businesses were forbidden from doing business with designated gangs. Public rallies, extortion practices and recruitment were restricted. Even the severing of fingers, once a symbolic ritual within the Yakuza, was now illegal to demand. In the media, it was portrayed as the beginning of the end for the Yakuza. But behind closed doors, the Yamaguchi-gumi was preparing for a different outcome. Adapting in the shadows, the rise of the front company. Rather than confront the law head-on, the Yamaguchi-gumi took a quieter path. They adapted. Watanabe ordered the rapid expansion of front companies, construction firms, entertainment agencies, real estate developers, logistics groups, even restaurant members were removed from formal gang rosters and reassigned as employees within these legitimate-seeming entities. By 1994, official Yakuza membership across Japan had dropped. Headlines declared success, but in truth, much of that manpower had simply shifted into the gray zone of pseudo-legal enterprise. Rough estimates suggested that nearly half of all Yakuza members were now employed under corporate umbrellas. The Yamaguchi-gumi was especially proficient in this transformation. By leveraging its long-standing dominance in Kobe's port and the construction industry, the group began absorbing government contracts for infrastructure and public works. Japan had entered its lost decade, a period of economic stagnation, and the government had responded with massive stimulus spending. Between 1992 and 2002, Japan invested more than $3.5 trillion into public construction projects. Of that, an estimated 1 to 5% found its way into companies linked to Yakuza syndicates. The Yamaguchi-gumi was among the largest beneficiaries. Media and money, influence without visibility. While Watanabe rarely appeared in public, his syndicate's influence expanded quietly. At its peak in the late 1990s, the Yamaguchi-gumi was estimated to control between 30 to 40% of all Yakuza manpower in Japan, a staggering concentration of underworld authority. They diversified their investment. Entertainment, production companies and music labels tied to the group backed celebrity careers and nightclub chains. Finance, loan sharking operations under corporate masks flourished. Politics, relationships with mid-level officials and even some lawmakers were whispered about, though rarely proven. But the organization also recognized the power of public perception. In some districts, the Yamaguchi-gumi held charity drives, helped coordinate earthquake relief, and ran anti-drug campaigns. These were as much propaganda as they were public service, designed to present the syndicate as a necessary force for stability amid societal unease. This dual image, ruthless criminal network on one hand, disciplined protector on the other, became a core part of the Yamaguchi-gumi's survival strategy in the post-Taoka era. Cracks beneath the surface. Despite appearances, not all was well. Internally, the shift from traditional rackets to corporate fronts created tensions within the syndicate. Older kobun resented the business-like culture emerging around them. Some younger members grew disillusioned, unable to gain the same status through violence or loyalty that previous generations had earned. Externally, public support for stricter enforcement continued to grow. In the early 2000s, prefectural governments began creating exclusion ordinances, local laws that banned gang members from opening bank accounts, signing leases or holding mobile phone contracts. Once again, the net was tightening, and within the Yamaguchi-gumi itself, questions about succession were beginning to surface once more. Watanabe had ruled for over 15 years. His health was beginning to fail. The time was approaching for a new generation to take the helm, one that would face challenges unlike any in the syndicate's history. Its financial empire extended across legitimate and illicit business. Its leaders moved through Tokyo and Osaka with a quiet confidence, and its membership, both official and unofficial, numbered in the tens of thousands. But a change in leadership would soon mark the beginning of a slow but significant decline. In 2005, after 16 years at the helm, Watanabe Yoshinori retired. The organization was stable, profitable, influential. The man chosen to replace him would be Tsukasa Shinobu, who would lead the syndicate into an entirely different world, one of shrinking influence, deepening internal division, and growing pressure from a Japanese society no longer willing to tolerate the quiet presence of organized crime. The rise of Tsukasa Shinobu. Tsukasa's selection as the sixth-generation Kumijo came as no surprise to those within the syndicate. A long-standing senior figure within the Yamaguchi-gumi, Tsukasa had developed a reputation for discipline, loyalty, and strategic intelligence. His leadership style was deliberate, measured, and deeply rooted in traditional Yakuza customs. But his reign began in a rapidly evolving Japan. The economic stagnation of the 1990s had eroded much of the public's tolerance for underworld presence. New regulations had begun to chip away at the Yakuza's financial foundations, and a younger generation, less invested in old codes of loyalty, was becoming harder to control. Tsukasa knew this, and he responded by centralizing authority. He tightened control over affiliated families. He sought to reassert dominance over certain territories. He cracked down on disobedience, and moved to eliminate factions showing signs of disloyalty. But this strategy, while stabilizing in the short term, created cracks beneath the surface, cracks that would eventually widen into a deep and public split. The 2015 split, birth of the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. By 2015, frustration had reached a breaking point. Several senior leaders, disillusioned with Tsukasa's strict leadership style and centralization of power, broke away from the main syndicate. They took with them more than 1,000 members, forming a new faction known as the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. The schism shocked the criminal underworld. It was the largest split in the Yamaguchi-gumi's history since the Ichiwakai rebellion decades earlier. But this time, the political climate was far less forgiving. Law enforcement,
public sentiment, and legal structures were all aligned to isolate, expose and weaken both sides of the fractured syndicate. The Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi sought legitimacy and recognition. Its leaders insisted they were the true inheritors of the Yamaguchi, but Tsukasa's faction responded with resolve, declaring the breakaway group illegitimate and initiating purges of suspected collaborators. Violence erupted across Kansai and Kobe. Attacks, shootings and retaliations spilled into the open once more. Though nowhere near the scale of the Yama-Ichi War, the conflict drew attention from the national press, prompting police to increase surveillance and public scrutiny. Within months, both factions found themselves under siege, not just from one another, but from the full weight of Japanese law enforcement. Boryokudan in the 21st century, a new reality. As the decade continued, the consequences of the split became clearer. Membership declined sharply. Younger recruits were rare. Businesses once quietly supportive distanced themselves from all known gang ties. Local governments enacted anti-gang ordinances preventing members from leasing property, opening bank accounts or participating in public life. The Yamaguchi-gumi, once the dominant force in Japan's underworld, now faced a shrinking world. By 2020 the group's active membership had dropped to around 8,000, a dramatic fall from its peak. The combined strength of the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi and other breakaway factions barely matched that of the diminished original. The days of open recruitment, public funerals and lavish displays of wealth were fading into memory. Even more symbolic, many Yakuza groups began to take down their headquarters signs, once proudly displayed at their offices as a mark of identity. Now secrecy was paramount. Visibility meant exposure. Exposure meant arrest, and arrest meant an almost certain end to one's life in the organization. The digital age and new forms of crime, while old methods of extortion and protection rackets still existed, law enforcement advances made them increasingly difficult to carry out. Instead, new forms of criminal activity began to emerge. Cybercrime, hackers for hire, phishing schemes and investment scams. Investment fraud, shell companies, foreign exchange scams and false security. Real estate manipulation, use of dummy corporations to control land or property development. The Yamaguchi-gumi adapted to some of these, but the tight surveillance and constant police pressure limited their scale and effectiveness. Traditional businesses once controlled by the syndicate, construction, gambling, nightlife, now often faced strict regulation or competition from legal operators. In many ways, modern Japan had outgrown the need for the Yakuza's services. The uncertain future. Today the Yamaguchi-gumi continues to exist. It remains the largest Yakuza syndicate in Japan, but it is no longer invincible. It is fragmented, monitored, and shrinking. Younger generations in Japan, raised in an era of lawfulness and digital transparency, show little interest in the old codes of honor and loyalty. Recruitment has dried up, and the legal framework surrounding organized crime grows tighter every year. As of now, no clear successor has emerged to lead the syndicate beyond Tsukasa Shinobu. Some observers believe the Yamaguchi-gumi, and perhaps the Yakuza as a whole, will slowly dissolve, replaced by looser, decentralized criminal networks less beholden to tradition, and far harder to track. Others believe that as long as economic inequality and opportunity gaps exist, organized crime will always find a way to survive if not thrive, though in a different form. What is certain is that the Yamaguchi-gumi's century-long story has come to define the modern era of organized crime in Japan. From dockworkers in Kobe to billion-dollar empires, from mountain diamonds and sake rituals to cybercrime and legal warfare, the history of the Yamaguchi-gumi is as much a story about Japan itself as it is about crime.